Okay. Uh, Good afternoon, good evening, everybody, dear panelists, dear participants. The topic of our event today, as you know, is adaptation to climate change in the Southern Mediterranean with focus on food and water security. The event will be organized in the form of a panel discussion. It is a hybrid event, live and online, as we can see, with participation of 4 key speakers and the moderator, myself. So we'll start by a rapid introduction of the panel, of the panelists. Then specific questions will then be directed to each one of you kind selves, and followed by a brief question and answer session, either with the present audience or online. And if time allows, we'll have additional questions will be directed to each one of the panelists after the final word. I would like to draw your attention, so those who are online, to introduce the Slido system, which is a system whereby you can put your question and answers online and we'll receive them here and use them, of course, in sync. As you know, the Mediterranean region is a hotspot for climate change. Warming is 20% faster than the global average and causing a wide range of negative impacts on the environment, the economy, and the people's livelihoods. Climate impacts exacerbate existing challenges, particularly water scarcity and food insecurities, which is further exacerbated by the Russian-Ukrainian war. There is now an urgent need for Mediterranean countries to adapt and increase their resilience to climate change. The EU is committed to supporting them in these endeavors in the framework of the ongoing joint cooperation. We are here to discuss challenges, joint responses, and initiatives, and reflect on how best to support the region going forward. Please allow me to introduce our honorable speakers. We have here with us online Ms. Henrike Trotman, who is the Acting Director of the Neighborhood South and Turkey Directorate at the Directorate General of Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations, known as DG NEAR, at the European Commission. She is also the head of the Regional Cooperation Neighborhood South Economic Investment Plan Unit. With over 25 years of experience at the European Commission, Ms. Trotman's areas of expertise includes development policy, the EU Common Foreign and Security Policy, humanitarian assistance and civil protection, and resilience building in fragile countries. Ms. Trotman led at the technical level the development of the new agenda of the Mediterranean, which was adopted in February 2021. She is overseeing its implementation, both on policy and development assistance program. It's wonderful to be with you here, Ms. Trotman. Thank you. I then would like to introduce Dr. Iman Sayed, who is a key person in the Ministry of Water and Irrigation in Egypt. She is currently the head of the planning sector of the Egyptian Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation. Dr. Sayed takes the lead role in creating dialogue among several development partners and multiple governmental and non-governmental organizations with water-related interests to support the implementation of Egypt's very complex water resources strategy and projects, of course. Dr. Iman Sayed has more than 22 years of extensive professional experience in a wide range of water resources planning and management aspects, as well as climate change, hydrological modeling, remote sensing, and knowledge management. She has participated in preparing Egypt's National Water Resources Plan in 2037, and she is the lead for Cairo Water Week Permanent Secretarial during this fifth edition. Welcome with here to us, Dr. Iman Sayed. Then I'm happy to introduce the esteemed Dr. Gramenos Mastroianni, correct? He is an Italian diplomat and currently is the Deputy Secretary General of the Union of the Mediterranean in charge of energy and climate action. Formerly, until August 2019, he acted as a coordinator for the environmental and head of the science policy interface at the Italian Development Corporation. Before this, Dr. Mastroianni served as president of the largest Italian Association for Sustainable Development Education, chair of the UN Mountains and Mountain Partnership, co-chair of the Global Island Partnership, president of and spokesperson of the Italian Alliance for the Commons. He is also a professor of sustainability, environment, and geostrategy at various universities, superior schools, and think tanks. Finally, we have with us Dr. Rula Khadra. Welcome, Dr. Khadra, who is the International Officer and Senior Researcher at the International Center for Advanced Mediterranean Agronomic Studies and is elected Governor of the Arab Water Council Board of Delegates. Dr. Khadra is a rural engineer who holds a Master of Science in Land and Water Resource Management and a PhD in Mediterranean Agriculture. She is also a Fulbright Fellow and the author of many multiple scientific publications. Her expertise includes working on strategic planning, modeling, design, and implementation of national irrigation management programs, developing irrigation and water distribution solutions, monitoring and evaluation, and outreach framework. And for the last 20 years, Dr. Rula Khadra has worked in the Mediterranean region and international arena, engaging youth in science and establishing research and innovation partnership. Allow me to very rapidly introduce myself. My name is Naguib Amin. I'm your moderator and the team leader of the ClimaMed project now. I'm an architect and urban planner with a long experience in urban planning, including climate change. My first question will be addressed to Ms. Trotman. So, dear Ms. Trotman, adapting to the impacts of climate change requires working across multiple sectors and in different directions. Our question now, what is the framework of EU support to climate adaptation, specifically in the southern Mediterranean country? What tools does the EU have at its disposal to support the region in this regard? The floor is yours, Ms. Trotman. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amin, and hello to everybody in Sharm-el-Sheikh. Good to see you all. It looks definitely warmer than it is here in Brussels, so next time I will join. But very good to see you. Very happy to have so much expertise on the panel and also to have a gender balanced panel. So very happy to be here at this side event the European Union is organizing. To come back to your question, let me maybe give you, because of course we're not going to repeat the problems that the climate change is causing, particularly in the southern neighborhood already now. You already gave us a couple of numbers on that one. But just to repeat that both obviously for the southern neighborhood partner countries, but also for the European Union, climate change is the number one priority for all the countries. And the EU is firmly committed to supporting countries in the efforts to fight or to at least adapt to climate change. It is a key priority in our cooperation with the region, and that was reflected in the recently adopted joint communication for a renewed partnership with the southern neighborhood, also more shortly known as the New Agenda for the Mediterranean, which is providing the political framework for our cooperation with the southern neighborhood since 2021. Linked to that, and I'll come back to that a little bit later, is also an economic and investment plan, which provides quite a large package of funding coming from the EU, but also potential to leverage investment through the international financial institutions and therefore have a much larger let's say, pot of funding available for climate change adaptation. This priority of climate change is also reflected in the EU spending target of 30% of the NDICI on climate action, which is coming in addition to a further 4 billion euros pledged by the EU in last year's State of the Union speech of the President of the European Commission. So all that to say, there is a lot of funding available. The question is, how do we best implement it to actually get some impact? Overall, on the EU level, we have an EU strategy for climate adaptation equally adopted in 2021, and that gives us a good basis for the discussions with the partner countries on best practice on fighting climate change. Obviously, climate impacts cut across all sectors, be it environment or ecosystems, water resources, infrastructure, agriculture and food production, human health and human security. And as the moderator has already mentioned, the effects of climate change have been made stronger, obviously, through the impact of the Ukrainian war since the beginning of this year. So therefore, we do need coordinated and joint responses to the climate crisis. And the commitment to that has been reaffirmed by both parts of the Mediterranean, the North and the South, to join forces in tackling challenges through the Union for Mediterranean Ministerial Declaration on Environment and Climate Action, which was adopted a bit more than a year ago in Cairo. This declaration explicitly states that countries' commitment to increase action on adaptation by taking appropriate measures aimed at enhancing countries' capacities to respond to the impacts of climate change and make the Mediterranean region more climate resilient. So meeting this challenge requires large public and private financial investments. And as already mentioned, unlocking private investments for climate adaptation is a very challenging exercise, but it is the one that really will have long-term impact and benefits for implementing measures. And therefore, this will outweigh the cost of these investments. The EU is supporting the region through a host of concrete programs and initiatives, channeled through its bilateral and regional cooperation and through its blending mechanisms, which allow for a mixing of grant funding with loans. Further opportunities for support are also becoming available in the context of our new funding instruments, particularly the EU Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, which also now leverages private investment through giving banking guarantees. So in the Mediterranean region, we are supporting the programs mainly by supporting governments in tackling food and water security, assisting countries to improve their disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management capacities, but also increasingly working with local administrations and civil society to implement inclusive adaptation measures. And we would like to strive also in the future to increase awareness and understanding of climate change, as well as raise funding for adaptation investments. I think this new direction we've been taking in the last 2 years is quite important because in the end, climate change adaptation has to happen on the most local level that is available. So working with CSOs, working with populations, discussing not only with governments, but also with the people on the ground and working with municipalities and regions certainly for us seems to be the best way to really get impact that is also lasting. So we have, for example, and I'll just give you some examples now, in Morocco, a new program which is called Terre Verte, which is has a funding envelope of 150 million euros, which includes measures to support producers in the development of more sustainable and climate-smart agricultural practices. This program was launched under the new EU-Morocco Green Partnership, the first partnership of its kind, which was signed just a couple of weeks ago, right in time for the COP, which aims to advance the external dimension of the European Green Deal through both policy dialogue and concrete action on the ground. In Egypt, as a second example, we have the Egyptian Pollution Abatement Program, which is a large initiative of 186 million euros to which the EU contributes, that supports industries in their in efforts to reduce the environmental footprint and use their resources more efficiently. Promoting a more efficient use of water resources is a key element of climate adaptation. We also have a couple of regional programs. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you might be aware that we have quite a number for the last years, which are looking at climate change, water and environment on the whole regional agenda, which also allows then the countries of the region to better cooperate on the challenges, which of course are very similar for them. So we are currently supporting Mediterranean cities in the region in developing, implementing and funding their sustainable energy and climate action plans, the so-called CCAPs. And we also support their evaluation for the Mediterranean branch of the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is progressively gaining quite a lot of traction in the Mediterranean. There, the main element is to try with technical assistance and in cooperation with the international financing organizations to allow municipalities to produce bankable projects which then can benefit of much larger funding from the international climate funds. But one of the challenges in the past has been to allow them to produce projects that are actually acceptable for these banking organizations. So this is a new program as of last year. And now we have another one coming upstream, which is called ACAMED, which will support countries in their efforts to better integrate climate adaptation and planning and budgeting, raise awareness of climate adaptation within the local communities, and again, try to help leverage additional funding for climate adaptation in the region. All this is, of course, part of the discussions that are happening inside the negotiations around the COP, but obviously also in the millions of, not millions, but at least thousands of side events that are being organized and various signatures, procedures, and ceremonies that are happening around the COP27. We think this is a very good element of gaining traction for this agenda, not only in Egypt, but also in most of the countries that are most concerned by climate change. One last point I would like to make before I give the floor back to the moderator is that as far as the immediate impact of the Ukraine war on the countries in the southern neighborhood goes, we have been trying to at least mitigate the effects a little bit by launching a dedicated food and resilience facility worth 225 million euros in support to southern neighborhood partners, which is now being rolled out in the different countries. And we can see that this really makes a difference, not only for food security short term, but also in terms of long-term strategies of adapting food security strategies and agriculture in the countries in the south to the effects of climate change. So with all those and many other initiatives where we combine bilateral and regional interventions and using the different tools available through financial mechanisms, the EU supports its southern neighbors in their efforts to become more climate resilient and better able to adapt to climate change. So we look forward to continued cooperation with the region. And I also very much look forward to an interesting discussion tonight on what the next steps should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Totman. It's very productive, refreshing, and so almost joyful to hear all this, because we will transmit it to our partners with whom we work on the operational level here. Thank you again. Thank you very much. My next question will be addressed to Dr. Iman Sayed. Dr. Iman, His Excellency, the Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation of Egypt, has said that he's looking forward to making use of our innovative research results to face water scarcity on the ground and contribute to securing the Egyptian water resources needed for achieving Egypt Vision 2030 for sustainable development. Can you tell us in broad lines how these innovation techniques will be used to face the challenges, noting that in Egypt we had thousands of years of traditional techniques, how it will, for instance, consolidate the implementation of Egypt's strategy for managing water scarcity, i.e. the National Water Resources 2017-2037? Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join this important session. This question actually fit to our status as a very scarce country. And as you know, Egypt in the hyper-arid region, and we face scarcity where we have about deficit of about 20 billion cubic meter per a year. This is deficit between our resources and our demand, and we try to fill the gap using recycling. So we still need to have more and more research in terms of filling the gap where we will have more population in near future, and we need to fill the food security for them, especially under the global crisis and supply for food chain. We depend only on the Nile River, which is the main source of the water, and it's a transboundary water where only we have 55.5 of renewable fresh water. We don't have except innovation and research to help us find new techniques to avail water. For example, the sal water is one of the more important source of our filling the gap of between demand and supply. Desalination is still need more and more to have a low technology, low cost technology and sustainable one, and even to have those technology to be in our to be manufacturing in our country. At the same side, we still have some side impact of desal. So research, again, we need more research in terms of how we can deal with the prime and how we can find a solution to increase the amount of desal without deteriorating the environment. At the same side, we need to seek desal for agriculture using brackish groundwater. This is one of our main pillar to find solution to increase our reclaimed area with water available in Egypt, which is a groundwater, but most of them are brackish groundwater. So research could help Egypt in this area. Also, we need to have low-cost technology for wastewater treatment. So as we depend on reuse as a main source of filling the gap between the demand and supply, more innovation and more research in terms of treatment technologies and especially sustainable and low cost, as Egypt cannot depend on tertiary treatment for all to cover all the Egypt and rural area. So still need more and more in this area. We have also in the agriculture sector, we still need to focus on new varieties could to be more tolerant to salinity and to drought conditions. Egypt is facing a problem with sea level rise, and we have a problem with the coastal area where we are eager to have a lot of damage, especially in winter, due to the height of waves, sea waves. At the same side, we have submergence of some low areas in the northern coast. We are seeking more research how we can use natural-based solution to protect our Nile Delta. Sometimes the hard rocks we are using causes a problem in other areas, so we protect one villages and the neighboring is suffering from impact of erosion or sediment. We need to have a solution to look at a complete and integrated approach to protect also the fertile areas at the northern coast from seawater intrusion. As you may know, Egypt now is taking a lead in canal rehabilitation mega program to be a complementary program for modernization of irrigation practices. Still, we need to have innovation how we can apply modern irrigation on the old land where it's clay land. We would like to keep them away from any salinization and would like to protect our soil from any side impact of the modern irrigation. So also how we can control the water. In near future, after complete the canal rehabilitation, still we need to control the water. Now we are going to allocate water based on levels in the canal, but we would like to have full control for each segment of the canals and to apply new techniques for water allocation. Rainfall harvesting, also this is one of areas we need to have innovation for early warning to know exactly how we can protect ourselves from flash flood. However, they are very rare, they are with a very small amount of water, but we would like to keep them. We have a project for flood protection, include more than 1,500 construction in remote areas and in the north coast of Egypt, storing small amount of water where our indigenous people live all over the year on those amount of water. Maybe we need also to focus in how we can have integrated approach to include groundwater and surface water in one package for better management. So research and innovation, still we need more and more. I guess there is no way for Egypt except increase the capacity in terms of innovation, because we don't have other Niles. So it's one Nile, and the population growing and growing each, from year to year. We have the same amount, and we have to find a solution out of the box. We keep our eyes on our colleague in the north of the Mediterranean. Maybe we can find a good experience. We used to look forward for Netherlands in terms of protecting the coastal areas and use sand nourishment and sand motors for lowlands, and also for Spain experience in modern irrigation and for desal and water treatment. So still we need more capacity building and knowledge exchange between our colleagues in the northern part to have more innovative approach to better manage our water resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor. It's also extremely reassuring that your effort and that of this very old, extraordinary ministry of yours is, and I'm sure you'll be able to find those 20 billion cubic meter for us or doing so research. Thank you again. So my next question, or third question, is addressed to Dr. Graminos Mastroianni. Dr. Mastroianni, the Mediterranean countries face, as we said, urgent climate changes that require multilateral responses and collective actions. Reinforced cooperation on climate action is needed and represents an opportunity for both shores of the Mediterranean. The Union of the Mediterranean acts as a unique platform to facilitate and promote regional dialogue, cooperation, and initiatives on climate action. Can you tell us more about the UFM, Union for the Mediterranean work, and reflect on where cooperation and dialogue are most needed regarding climate adaptation in particular?
Thank you very much. So many concrete things have been said so far, and I particularly thank Enrique for already mentioning some important pillars of our common actions. So let me take it the opposite way, more general terms, starting with a very, very, very general consideration, which is well known to our friends of the European Union. The European Union launched this fantastic experience called the Green Deal, putting the European Union forward with one awareness. If the Green Deal was developed as an ivory tower, will be the best, full stop. It is proven that this would induce instability around it. And this, in turn, would cause so many imported costs that in the end, the European Union would not have enough money to attain the Green Deal. So, this is very general consideration. How do we cope with it? Let me give you two examples of things that already happen. One about causes and one about solutions. Arab Springs, they have their own historical, political aspects, but it is known that before the movement became political, it was preceded by 4 years of agitation in the streets. And this was due to nothing political, but to something else called food hyperinflation. In turn, food hyperinflation was due to many causes, one of which was climate change. And climate change was not striking directly the region. It was striking rather Ukraine, Argentina, Australia, countries that are big producers of cereals. A small contraction in production, speculation, the price of food rises 4 times. You have 3.6 million new poors in this region, and there you have all this destabilization. We need to look at the chain of consequences. Solutions. Another case that happened, Syria. Syria, again, has all its historical, political causes, but doubtless there was also a climate push. Everybody knows it. 4 years of unprecedented drought. What fewer people know is that if the traditional Syrian farm, which is the traditional Mediterranean farm, instead of being replaced with a new model, which is the model that distributes food in a quite uneven way, a model that creates calories enough to feed 12 billion people, except that it creates 2 billion people who are sick out of eating too much, in face of almost 1 billion people who are in food insecurity. This same model kind of pushes all agriculture to go towards a certain way of doing things. It's called the income farm, where you produce nothing that the family uses, you produce what the market demands. The traditional Mediterranean farm was the family farm, where you produce what you need in your family, and if you have some excess, you exchange it on the market. This farm doesn't really make you think that you'll make a lot of money, but has a characteristic which is very much praised, for instance, in Wall Street. It's called portfolio diversification. If you bet everything on soybeans, and the one thing that is bad with soybeans arrives, you're dead. But if you have a farm in which you have 1 olive tree, 2 goats, some orchard and things like that, maybe the tomatoes are affected, but you will still have the olives. Now, what happened in Syria? Not only the drought arrived, but before the arrival of the drought, there was a decision which I must say made sense, nothing bad. Let's transit our agricultural system towards the income farm system, which is more modern, it produces more income, except that the bet was on cotton that drinks a huge quantity of water. Had we diversified, had we decided to stick to modules that incorporate all the knowledge that comes from our traditions, and I'm not saying that we have to give up technology, on the contrary. The traditional farm, accompanied by high technology, is something that gives an answer. Of course, I'm not here to discuss the model of farming, but this is an example. The question is, what do we have to do? What does the Union for the Mediterranean think about the problem? I think that first we need to be local, considering local the whole region. We need to integrate a global approach, multilateral approach, including all the influences that are coming into our region. But when we think about solution, we have to think that this is a region that faces a huge risk, not only for food security, it's a destabilization risk, and there is one way out. This one way out is putting together what we have. The north needs the solar potential of the south. The south needs larger markets to develop the solar potential, otherwise there wouldn't be enough capital to do that. In this field, sharing means also sharing knowledge. Let me end with one more example. There is a chapter in these negotiations which is kind of tense. It's called technology transfer. It's tense because it's conceived like the gift of the beautiful and advanced towards those that are less beautiful and advanced. Maybe, but what is knowledge? In 15 years, Southern Europe will have a climate which is very similar to the climate that North Africa has experienced during 5,000 years. Who knows how to cope with that? Is it only a question of solar panels? You go along the Silk Road, you find some cone-shaped buildings called the yakshal. In Persian, it means the fridges. They were used by merchants to deposit perishable goods. They have one characteristic. No matter how hot it is outside, inside the temperature is always between 0 and -4. Who needs who? This is the way we see it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very, very interesting, technical and also symbolic in the same way introduction. My last question would be my fourth question is to Dr. Rola Khadra. And Dr. Rola, ensuring the sustainability of water resources is an urgent concern in the Maghreb region. where the situation is far more alarming than the rest of things. The CHIAM Center, where you work, took part in the preparation of a report, a very important report entitled Water Security Nexus in North Africa, catalyzing regional coordination around climate change, resilience, and migration. Can you tell us about the study's key findings and its main policy recommendation, and how your center is supporting the implementation of this recommendation? Thank you.
So let's start from two standing points. That climate change is causing actually structural shifts in the water resources systems in the Maghreb region. But this is accompanied actually by a growing demand from all the sectors, including the domestic sector and agriculture. So this causes trade-offs among all the sectors with a lot of challenging policy choices. So what to choose and to whom allocate water. At the same time, migration is a social and an economic long-standing phenomenon in the Maghreb. And the recent years, the Maghreb has become a transit point and also a destination for migrants coming from Sahelian Africa and further south. So it is very important to contextualize the factors or the climate factors when we are talking about security and migration. There is a really great risk to overprivilege the climate impacts because they are eye-catching, and to naturalize, let's say, the human movement rather than understanding the underlying policy and political factors, which are really very important. So we have to more fully understand how far climate as a factor intersects with other factors like education, gender, but also the declining employment, for example, in the agricultural labor force. There are many important considerations to include. For example, how specific social settings can lead to different outcomes as a result of a similar climate impact. It is very well known in Morocco, for example, and it is clear to the eye that in areas where there is degraded environment or water scarcity, it is very clear the rural-urban migration. But this doesn't become widespread if there are no already significant social inequalities and absence of safety nets. And this is particularly so when there is decades of government policy to shift or to change the functioning of the local community institutions, including as a result of economic policy leading towards market systems. In different contexts, the efficiency of conservation practices and social cohesion can make it possible for communities to invest in what we call the common good. And this would reduce vulnerability to climate shocks and increase the resilience of the communities. And the groundwater is a very important example on that. There are ongoing processes by which intensive agriculture and the livestock systems, they are transferred from environments where water resources are depleted to environments that they are considered undeveloped, but they are fragile and vulnerable environment. And these systems rely on groundwater pumping to reduce uncertainty, and this is the result. Instead of encouraging adaptation by adopting alternative solutions that account for the natural resources balance in these areas, there are new dynamics that accentuate environmental imbalances and build in greater climate risk through overexploitation. So what is a must is a careful integration of policy across many sectors. I mean, agriculture, infrastructure, natural resource management, industrial employment policy, accounting for the social change, for gender, and the decisions to move. This is not anymore a regional phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon. This is why we always talk about regional and international cooperation. It is very important in many senses. One mean is the sharing of the good practices to mitigate the impact of climate change and to support a more coherent migration policy, putting development at the core. Now, what my institution is doing, we actually, since always, this year, it is our 60th anniversary, and since always, we invest in youth. Through training and cooperation and research, we invest in youth. Youth and people are at the center, and activities are only the means. So this is what we do all over the Mediterranean, concretely, and we also support the policy dialogue among different governments of the Mediterranean, north and south, and we work with our partners and with the institutions on the ground.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Doctor, to show how the link is so strong to begin with from what Graminos just said, but also between the technical problems and the socio-economic political problems as well, and of course the human factor, and of course in our regions where over 70% of the population can be classified as youth. Thank you very much again. And now we will see if we have any questions from our attendees here. If you have any specific questions, or if we have any specific questions that come from on the site itself. We see, all right, I can see one here. I'm supposed to be able to read it on my little thing here, but I can read it there. Here you are. There is someone? No one is there. Yes. All right, we take the questions from Mr. Thomas Gladek. To finance sustainable nature-based solutions to reduce the impact of global warming on food and water, how do you establish the intersect value of fresh water? I guess this is addressed to the water specialist, Dr. The big water planner. How do you answer this for us?
So, actually, if we have if we are talking about sustainable natural-based solution to reduce the impact of global warming on food and water, we need to have finance to direct it to the beneficiaries themselves directly. So we need to have finance for farmers to modernize their system and to manage their and their internal network, so they be more adapted. They will be more producer for food and to have more production. Rather than giving the finance to the government, I guess to have a private sector and to have a partnership among private sector and farmers in different areas, also in terms of water quality and water treatment, to have the private sector and innovative finance and sustainable finance could give a good solution to have more adaptive water system to climate change. So still lagging as a private sector in different areas, and a partnership between private sector and other organizations in terms of implementation.
Thank you. That actually makes quite sense, and it calls to me the time when there were discussion. When there were discussion of bringing the Nile water to the Red Sea, tourist developments, and that was the very first discussion about the private sector in desalination, and which I believe it was definitely a success to at least not to waste to water Nile water on the thing. I'm not sure if we have another. Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Just to keep the discussion, I'm from Climamet Project. It was interesting what you said, Dr. Mastroianni, on the capacity of southern Mediterranean countries to pass some knowledge to EU countries, actually. In your experience, it was very interesting for me. You never think about that, actually, and it is. I fully agree with you that it is true. And I wonder if this perspective, if this possibility is already integrated in your work or in policy documents, and are there fora, international fora, where this can happen?
Thank you. Actually, we were planning to establish in Morocco a knowledge exchange hub. While this COP talks about technology transfer, we were thinking of a knowledge exchange hub. But let us be realistic. Even if we build the shiniest knowledge exchange hub, what do we do? This has to be understood by economy. And my sensation is that the business world is starting to understand these potentials. Exploring the idea that solutions come not only from newly developed knowledge, but also from the soundness of millenary knowledge. And again, I'm nothing but someone who praises the past. I know that the past is a period in which we usually died at the age of 40 and with plenty of but this knowledge adapted to certain territories and updated, it's starting to get into the observation lens of private sector. And this is, for me, very, very promising. Us, institution, we can act as catalyzers. Maybe we can join private initiative with the correct finance. Maybe we can act to prepare the correct political acceptance of practices that somehow will modify the market, but it's not us who will make it happen. We need to encourage the private sector to uptake all this knowledge which is there. And I have an example. There is a sector that nobody talks about, which is forestry. But forestry moves billions. And it is essential, not only for the economy, but also for the rest of our survival. Because correct forestry management means that you will have a productive agriculture. Otherwise, you'll be obliged to pump fertilizers and things like that, or to go search water miles. Well, in the forestry sector, we have witnessed a gradual increase of cooperation between the North and the South Rim, which was not sponsored by governments, because governments did not realize it was happening. Why is it happening? Because in that sector, they are understanding that species which are vital and commercially viable now in the South are probably the species that can save economic activity in the North in a few years. The same is happening in the market of grapes for wine. The very delicate market where the value is connected with the location and traditions and things like that. Everything is shifting north so fast, and this could have been faced as a new war of competition, but people realized things are going north. How will I make my fortune in Italy with a kind of grape that is traditionally grown in Algeria?
Yes, please.
This is interesting that you're talking about private companies. I'm here as technical director of an Italian foundation established by a number of businesses. The name of the foundation, among those names like Gruppo Illy, Andrea Illy is our chair, Mutti, a lot of companies in the agri-food. The name is Regenerative Society Foundation. We want to change and shift the bottom line of businesses, not talking about pilots. We don't need them. The idea and the question is for all of you. We are cross-sector, we do work in construction, but obviously, as we are Italians, there is plenty of knowledge and plenty of will and plenty of determination in the agri-food. We got ideas on how to connect, and we're trying to do that. For instance, valorization of carbon capture in soils. We need policies for that. We need pricing, okay? We got ideas on how to try to partner, and some of our companies are already importing from countries in Africa, Southeast Asia. How can we relate to your countries, to your institutions, because we are obviously funding when it comes to our own projects. Companies are funding their own development. But to go bigger, we need institutional support. We need public-private partnerships. We need to access collaborative funding. Italian cooperation might be, we were talking to someone, we're discussing a project for Kenya. Is that new foundation we would like to get on the ground?
Maybe Ms. Trotman, I don't know if you followed the question, and if you probably would like to comment on this one, please. Or has it?
If
Hello?
you can hear me still.
Yes.
Okay, very good. No, I would. Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot also for the other questions. I mean, maybe I can answer in one go 2 or 3 elements that were shared by the panelists, but also by some of the people who intervened. I think the bottom line is really, or the crunch thing is really a private enterprise, and basically the fact that this should be some sort of an aid approach of, and I know this is a big discussion in the context of the COP now, but it's not about giving money to governments only so they can adapt to climate change because they didn't cause it. It's really about getting private business interested, as one of the colleagues said, and it's about making this part of an economic approach. And this is where what I would say to the last speaker, making sure that there is an economic thinking behind this. What is the interest of an investment in this area? What can we exchange in terms of knowledge on the way you can deal with ever scarcer water resources, where some countries in the southern neighborhood are actually more advanced than countries in the northern neighborhood, who are also or countries in the EU who are only now catching up with the fact that you have massive water scarcity. How can you invest in the right areas which have a future in a way that allows you to actually also earn money with it? And there we are creating a number of platforms where we don't only have the aid practitioners and the technical practitioners who work on water, who work on food security, but also private business around and the international finance institutions who can actually provide the kind of funding that is needed. This is work in progress, and of course new elements like CBAM, as just mentioned, will also play a big role. And of course everything has been a little bit thrown into disarray by the war in Ukraine. But I think on the EU side, we're very confident that this is the way to go in the next years and possibly in the next decade, and we'll continue to push this agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In this context of what you just said, there's another question that came by virtual question, which says exactly, by an anonymous question, how do we convince stakeholders, and I trust that stakeholders mean also the IFIs, to invest on adaptation, whereas returns into investment may not be as clear as with mitigation measures? I know that's a very, very vast question, but probably if you reflect on this, on working with the IFIs and attracting them to adaptation, which is a major challenge. Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Well, that is indeed a very good question, and I would even add a different challenge to that. How do you convince IFIs not to adapt only in the countries who are the most advanced on this agenda, but also in the countries who are a little bit behind because they're fragile, because they live in conflict situations. And it's a discussion we're having nearly daily with the colleagues from the banks. I think in the end, it will again depend how you make a business case. And if you, for example, look into agriculture, and some of the colleagues have mentioned that, if you adapt into adaptation of your water resources, and as you said yourself, you move away from wasteful water practices and you move into water saving practices, you will be able to design agriculture in the future and water catchment systems that allow you to then have water available that, of course, people will also partially have to pay for. Now, this is not, of course, kind of business cases like investing in semiconductor chips or something like that. And this is why the EU, for the foreseeable future, will have to put grant money into these approaches to make sure that the IFIs are staying on board. But I think it's by working in a more granular fashion, and this is also, as the topic of this discussion this afternoon is, working also on the local level. There is an investment case to be made, and we're ready to continue to help on this.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, and I assure you that people like us, operational, are working slowly but firmly towards this direction. Finally, in the last 5 minutes, I do thank you, each one of you, for this very interesting questions and answer sessions. Ms. Trotman gave us a good outline of the extensive tools that the EU have at its disposal to support South Mediterranean region in a very concrete way. Dr. Iman Sayed told us how strategic planning and innovation are the main tools to find those finally 20 billion cubic meters, and hopefully more. Dr. Mastrioni, you gave us a very good insight on the actually on the philosophy and the concrete actions of the Union for the Mediterranean, which is definitely a unique platform to facilitate and promote regional dialogue and cooperation. And Dr. Rula, thank you so much for your insight, for informing us how those key findings and recommendations are intersection and advanced by yourself and your institution. Thank you very much for being with us here. It's a pleasure to moderate this. Thank you, Ms. Trotman. Thank you, Mr. Glenmanis. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.